Imagine a continent sprawling under the scorching African sun, where savannas transition into impenetrable forests, and then give way to boundless deserts. In the rays of the setting sun, the wind plays in the grass, as if whispering ancient stories. We will talk about a world that often remains in the shadows, about times when ideas about the world order were completely different. In the very heart of Africa, there existed an empire whose greatness and wealth surpassed everything that the European continent could offer. The name of the ruler of that empire still evokes awe and admiration, because we are talking about Mansa Musa, a man who is considered the richest in history. At a time when Europe was suffering from famine and torn apart by internal conflicts, and its cities were mired in mud, Africa enjoyed abundance. Caravans laden with gold, salt, spices, and silk crossed the sands of the Sahara. In cities such as Timbuktu and Niani, the speech of merchants and scholars from all over the Muslim world sounded. But time is inexorable. It is capable of hiding entire civilizations under a layer of sand, turning past grandeur into a barely audible whisper of forgotten legends. The history of the Malian Empire is not only a story about untold riches, but also a sad story about how human memory sometimes betrays entire civilizations to oblivion. In this article, we will try to resurrect past greatness from the ashes. Imagine bustling trading squares, dusty caravan routes, luxurious palaces, and the rustle of ancient manuscripts. Let your imagination transport us through the ages to an era when Africa surpassed Europe in wealth and power, to an era when the legend of Mansa Musa was born. How did this great state of Mali arise? History preserves pages inscribed not with ink, but with wind and sand, pages that rarely appear in textbooks, but are waiting for their researchers. Today we will turn over one of these pages, the story of the birth of a great power in the very heart of West Africa, among boundless forests and savannas. In the distant western part of Africa, where the Niger River forms a picturesque bend, lie lands generously endowed with both natural resources and talented people. For centuries, these lands served as a crossroads of trade routes, along which nomadic tribes and merchants transported salt, hides, spices, fabrics, and, of course, gold. Long before the emergence of the Malian Empire, the Empire of Ghana flourished here, an ancient state that controlled the lucrative gold trade. It was the first major kingdom in the region. However, time spares even the most powerful empires. Under the pressure of neighboring tribes and nomads, the Empire of Ghana fell, giving way to new forces. After the fall of Ghana, its vast territories did not turn into a lifeless desert. Various tribes, small chiefdoms, and small kingdoms continued to exist, trade, engage in armed conflicts, and cherish hopes for the revival of former unity. Among these peoples, the Mandinka tribe stood out, from which the people of Mali subsequently formed. They lived in the southern regions, in fertile forests, far from arid deserts. The Mandinka engaged in agriculture, growing millet, raised livestock, mastered the art of metal smelting, and, even then, actively developed trade routes connecting coastal regions with northern caravans. At the center of these historical events was Sundiata Keita, whose fate began with tragic circumstances and exile. Legends say that Sundiata was born with a physical defect that prevented him from walking. However, like a mythical hero, he once acquired the ability to move, which became a symbol of his future role in the rise of his people. During his formative years, Sundiata witnessed destruction and humiliation, as the lands of the Mandinka were under the yoke of a ruler from the neighboring state of Soso, the cruel king Sumaoro Kante, who ruled his subjects by instilling fear in them. Sundiata Keita managed to unite the scattered tribes under his leadership, and in 1235 inflicted a crushing defeat on Sumaoro in the historic Battle of Kirina. This event became a turning point in the history of Africa and was included in epics as the beginning of a new era. After his victory, Sundiata became the first Mansa, Emperor of Mali, laying the foundation for a new dynasty. Sundiata Keita not only liberated his people from foreign oppression, but also laid a solid foundation for a state that was to become one of the most powerful and wealthy in history. The greatness of the Mansa began with a visionary step. Instead of forcibly subjugating the tribes, he offered them an attractive prospect of order, impartial justice, and economic prosperity. He enacted clearly formulated laws, fairly distributed land holdings among loyal leaders, and restored vital trade arteries through which streams of gold, salt, and slaves flowed unstoppably. But perhaps his most important achievement was creating a sense of belonging among the people to something grand. An empire that was not just disparate territories, but a community united by common goals and aspirations. Like any powerful state, Mali owed its prosperity to rich natural resources and a favorable geographical location. To the west and south lay fertile lands, generously yielding harvests of millet, rice, and sorghum. Savannas were home to countless herds of livestock, and the northern borders touched the vast Sahara Desert, where bustling caravan routes carried salt from distant Taoudeni and gold from the rich mines of Bambouk and Bure. These caravans served as a link between Mali and the rest of the world, connecting it to thriving North African cities, mysterious Egypt, vibrant Maghreb, and the distant East. As a result, Mali became not just a state, but a pulsating heart of the global economy. Since ancient times, the Mandinka people had revered the power of their ancestors, but with the arrival of caravans in their lands, a new religion began to spread, Islam. It was first adopted by merchants and members of the nobility, and later by the emperors themselves. Islam organically intertwined with the unique culture in which ancient African traditions of wisdom harmoniously combined with writing, books, poetry, and the laws of the Holy Quran. After the death of Sundiata Keita, the possessions of the Malian Empire stretched over a vast distance from the Atlantic coast to the depths of the Niger. However, the time of its greatest power had not yet come. The era of Sundiata Keita gave way to the reign of a figure whose name became synonymous with immense treasures and unparalleled generosity, a man who is still spoken of today as the richest in human history. His name was Mansa Musa. But before delving into his era, let's imagine an evening in Niamey, the capital of Mali. The savannah cools in the moonlight. The air is filled with the aroma of fresh rice and the smoke of bonfires. And in the distance, under the quiet ringing of caravan camels' bells, a new turn of this story begins. At a time when Europe was ravaged by plagues and famine, a completely different world flourished in the heart of West Africa, a world where gold was not a symbol of luxury, but an integral part of everyday life, a world where salt roads led to markets teeming with goods that Europeans could only dream of. The economic system of the empire was organized in such a way that its wealth seemed inexhaustible. This prosperity was not based on the plunder of neighboring peoples or random luck. No, at the heart of this power lay a solid platform woven from natural resources, a favorable geographical location, and the labor of thousands of subjects. The story of Mali's greatness originates from the depths of the earth. The southern borders of this empire stretched along fertile plains, where the climate allowed year-round cultivation of crops such as millet, sorghum, and rice. These generous lands not only provided food for the population, but also served as a solid foundation for thriving trade. However, Mali's true treasure was hidden in its depths, illuminated by the African sun. In the west, in the areas of Bambouk and Bure, were some of the richest gold mines of that era. One can imagine a land where gold nuggets literally lay underfoot. Entire settlements devoted themselves to washing river sand in the hope of finding precious grains. Merchants from the north and east said that in Mali, gold was valued cheaper than salt, and there was a considerable amount of truth in these words. Salt, in turn, was no less valuable than the noble metal. In the hot climate, it was not just a seasoning, but a vital element that allowed food to be preserved, maintain health, and even serve as a means of payment. In remote salt mines of the Sahara, such as in Taoudeni, huge stone slabs of salt were mined, which were then transported by caravans across the vast desert to the markets of Mali. Gold flowed from the south, salt arrived from the north, and Mali, like a mighty bridge, stood between these two streams of wealth. Like any complex economic organism, the state of Mali levied a duty on every merchant who dared to cross its possessions. For every laden camel, for every bag of precious salt, for every ounce of sparkling gold, immense riches flowed into the empire's treasury, riches that no European power dared to dream of. However, trade in salt and gold was only the tip of the iceberg. Exquisite fabrics from Egypt, exotic glass ornaments from the Maghreb, and spicy aromas of the East flowed through the lands of Mali in an endless stream. Unfortunately, an integral part of this system was also the slave trade, a practice, alas, widespread in those times, and Mali was no exception to this sad rule. Caravans, like living arteries, nourished the economic heart of the empire. Endless caravans of camels stretch for miles in the imagination. Their journey was long and arduous, lasting weeks, sometimes months. The caravanners were exhausted by the daytime heat and nighttime cold, sandstorms that seemed alive, and the constant threat of bandit attacks. But the road invariably led them to the bustling markets of Mali, where goods were exchanged for gold and salt, a commodity equally valuable for life and trade. In the capital, Niamey, and other major cities of the empire, the bazaars teemed with life and energy. The lively marketplaces echoed with a multitude of languages: Mandinka, Sank, Arabic, Berber. Here, deals were made for the sale of exquisite fabrics and fragrant spices, hardy horses and human cargo, colorful carpets and sparkling jewelry. Merchants from distant lands, celebrated poets, and wise sages gathered around crackling fires, telling captivating stories of faraway lands and untold riches. The economic prosperity of the Malian Empire was underpinned by strict laws established by the Mansa, ensuring clear control and order. Every caravan underwent mandatory registration. All goods were meticulously accounted for, and taxes were promptly paid into the state treasury. The empire, like the silent desert, seemed imperturbable, but its laws were powerful and unwavering. Mali's economy was not limited to material aspects. In the bustling bazaars, brisk trade was conducted not only in goods, but also in knowledge. Merchants brought with them valuable books and religious teachings, which found refuge in local universities and libraries, playing a vital role in the country's cultural life. Travelers of the time marveled at the wealth of Mali. The renowned Arab historian Ibn Battuta noted that nowhere in the world had he encountered such order and tranquility as in Mali. He wrote that even ordinary peasants could afford clothing adorned with gold threads, and their homes were furnished with luxurious fabrics brought from the East. It was this thriving economy that made Mali the center of the then-known world. Gold was not an unattainable dream, but an everyday reality, taken for granted. This entire complex system rested on one man, whose name became synonymous with untold riches: Mansa Musa. It was he who transformed Mali from a powerful state into a legend capable of capturing the imagination of the entire known world. The greatness of the Malian Empire began to take shape under Sundiata and his successors, but the period of greatest prosperity, the true Golden Age, is inextricably linked to the name of Mansa Musa, a ruler whom posterity remembers as the richest person in the history of civilization. His name still inspires awe and astonishment. The exact date of his birth remains a subject of debate among historians, as the chronicles of the time do not contain specific information. The written records that have survived to this day were created far beyond the borders of Mali by Arab and Persian authors who were captivated by tales of the fabulous treasures concentrated in the distant African state. It is known that in 1312, after the death of his brother, Mansa Musa inherited the throne. History knows many examples of unexpected ascents and accidental elevations. It is believed that Mansa Musa was not a direct heir to the throne. Legends say that his predecessor undertook a daring expedition across the Atlantic Ocean in search of new lands beyond the horizon, but never returned, opening the way for Musa to power. He inherited a state that already possessed considerable power and prosperity, but he not only managed to preserve its power, but also transformed Mali into a legend whose fame reached the most remote corners of the known world. Mansa Musa was not just a ruler. He was the epitome of the African ideal of power at that time, combining justice, generosity, magnanimity, firmness, and foresight. He ruled a vast territory inhabited by many people speaking different languages and managed to ensure peace and stability. His reign was marked by economic growth, the development of trade, and culture. However, Mansa Musa gained the greatest fame for his celebrated pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, which caused a sensation in the Muslim and even the Christian world, astonishing contemporaries with its splendor and untold riches. Before delving into the story of this remarkable pilgrimage, it is worth presenting the personality of Mansa Musa. Historical chronicles depict him as a stately man with an imposing appearance and a gaze that combined kindness and determination. A deeply religious Muslim, he also showed respect for the traditional beliefs of his people. His faith was sincere and found expression in the construction of mosques, the support of scholars, and the invitation of Islamic theologians and architects from around the world to Mali. At the same time, Mansa Musa remained a patriot of his land, aware of the value of gold and the importance of trade. He understood that the prosperity of Mali depended not only on caravan trade, but also on the labor of people building cities, cultivating fields, and guarding the borders of the state. Mansa Musa's rule was characterized by firmness and justice. He strengthened the borders of the empire, expanded its possessions, subjugated neighboring territories, and improved the system of internal roads. Realizing that the power of the empire was based on stability, he paid close attention to maintaining order in the provinces, appointed reliable governors, and controlled the collection of taxes. In addition, Mansa Musa was a far-sighted ruler who understood the power of symbolic gestures. He knew that not only laws and regulations remain in the memory of peoples, but also vivid images. That is why he conceived the Hajj, which was destined to go down in history as one of the most impressive journeys. For a devout Muslim with the means to perform this sacred act, the Hajj for Mansa Musa was not just the fulfillment of a religious precept. He sought to demonstrate to the whole world the magnificence of his power, the generosity and might of his people. His pilgrimage turned into a spectacular performance that was rumored from Cairo to Constantinople, from Baghdad to Marrakesh. But before we set off on a journey with this brilliant golden escort, let's move to Nyani one evening. The air is filled with the aroma of fried wheat and delicious sweets, and the rhythmic beats of drums can be heard in the distance. Under the starry dome in his palace built of burnt clay and wood, Mansa Musa is deeply studying a map of the world. He knows about the existence of cities and countries outside Mali. which wise men have told him about. He realizes that his name is not yet known in distant lands, but he is sure that this will soon change. Soon the glory of him will spread throughout the world. Pilgrimage that shook the world. History knows many majestic journeys, but none of them was accompanied by such a dazzling brilliance of gold, such a roar of caravans, and such an impact on the world economy as Mansa Musa's Hajj to Mecca. In the distant 1324, when the Mali Empire had already firmly established its dominance in West Africa, becoming the undisputed leader of the region, the world outside the continent still remained unaware of its greatness. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca was not just a religious act, but also a powerful statement designed to demonstrate that in the heart of Africa there is a power to be reckoned with. The road to the Islamic shrines lay through lands that were harsh and merciless. Long before departure, Mansa Musa began careful preparations, gathering around him a retinue whose scale was staggering. According to legend, his caravan numbered more than 60,000 people. Thousands of warriors, high-ranking officials, devoted servants, and ordinary citizens accompanied their ruler on this historic journey. As part of the caravan, 80 camels moved, each of which carried about 130 kilograms of pure gold. Thousands of slaves, many of whom were dressed in luxurious fabrics and adorned with gold bracelets, walked alongside the caravan, emphasizing the wealth and power of the empire. It was not just a pilgrimage, but a whole mobile city which had everything necessary for life, and even more, from security and merchants to poets, singers, and scientists. People moved with Mansa Musa through endless deserts and crowded cities, leaving an indelible mark not only in the sands of time, but also in the memory of those who were fortunate enough to witness this grand spectacle. The dusty caravan made its way through the vast expanses of the Sahara, heading for the lively cities of North Africa, and then through the lands of Egypt and the Arabian Peninsula to the sacred Mecca. Among the many cities through which this path passed, a special place in the memory of travelers was occupied by the majestic Cairo. In those days, Cairo shone as one of the most important centers of the Islamic world, its streets teeming with merchants, mosques, and bustling markets, where merchants from all corners of the East met. The arrival of Mansa Musa's caravan in Cairo became an event that amazed the imagination of local residents. He appeared before them not as a humble pilgrim, but as a mighty lord with untold treasures. Musa generously distributed gold to the needy and the rich, gave coins to children, bought goods at prices significantly higher than market prices, and left generous donations in mosques. However, this unprecedented generosity had its consequences. In Cairo and then throughout Egypt, inflation broke out. The abundance of gold led to its devaluation. Prices for goods soared to the skies, and the city's economy plunged into chaos. Arab chroniclers testified that even decades later, people remembered this pilgrimage of Musa as an era of upheaval. However, Musa's generous gestures were carefully calculated. He aspired to have Mali's name echoed in every city, to spread the fame of his generosity from Cairo to Baghdad. During his stay in Cairo, Musa had the honor of meeting the Sultan of Egypt, Al-Nasir Muhammad. It was said that even the Sultan's courtiers gazed at Mansa Musa with astonishment and secret envy. Musa conducted himself with dignity, generously bestowing gifts upon everyone around him, and strictly adhered to Muslim traditions, demonstrating his deep piety. Having triumphantly concluded his visit to Cairo, Musa set his sights across the vast expanses of the Arabian Peninsula to fulfill the sacred duty of every Muslim, the Hajj to Mecca, his heart filled with reverence as he offered prayers at the Kaaba, the sanctuary to which millions of believers flock annually. But for Musa, this place was illuminated not only by spiritual light, but also by the literal brilliance of gold. Mansa Musa's return from pilgrimage was marked not only by the enrichment of his spiritual experience, but also by an influx of intellectual power into the empire. He brought with him a constellation of outstanding scholars, talented architects, inspired poets, experienced lawyers, and skilled artisans. His goal was to attract the best minds of the Islamic world, to erect mosques like pearls and libraries that preserve invaluable knowledge. This step was not merely a manifestation of religious devotion, but an act of cultural and intellectual exchange that transformed the face of the Mali Empire. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage became a turning point in the perception of Africa beyond its borders. European and Arab cartographers first marked the state of Mali on their maps, recognizing its existence and significance. Mansa Musa transformed into a legendary figure surrounded by myths and rumors. He was depicted seated on a throne, holding a golden scepter in one hand, a symbol of power, and a golden orb in the other representing wealth. Maps of that time were adorned with the inscription, "Here reigns the wealthiest king of Mali." Paradoxically, it was this pilgrimage which glorified Mali to the world that laid the foundation for its future trials. News of Mali's immense wealth reached Europe and the East, attracting the attention not only of trading partners, but also of potential invaders, eager for gold and resources. However, at that moment, no one foresaw the impending troubles. The Mali Empire shone in all its glory, its capitals grew and prospered, libraries filled with knowledge, and markets with gold. Upon returning to his homeland, Mansa Musa began implementing a large-scale plan aimed not only at building new mosques, but also at shaping a new image of his country as a powerful and enlightened state whose glory, unfortunately, has hardly reached our days. It was about creating a real center of knowledge and immense wealth. In the history of every state, there is a city destined to become its heart, its soul, its symbol. For the Roman Empire, that city was undoubtedly Rome. For ancient Persia, and for the Malian Empire, the legendary Timbuktu. Today, when we pronounce the name of this city, it evokes an image of something distant, almost mythical. In everyday speech, Timbuktu has become a metaphor for the end of the world, a place that exists only in fantasies. However, in the Middle Ages, Timbuktu was a quite real and undoubtedly amazing city, one of the largest centers of science, culture, and trade of its time. The city arose on the banks of the Great River, in a place where the endless sands of the Sahara meet the fertile lands of the savannah. Initially, it was a small settlement founded by the Tuaregs, nomadic tribes that controlled caravan routes through the desert. Here, trade caravans stopped to water camels and exchange goods. At first, it was just a temporary camp, a transit point, but the favorable location and the passage of time played their role. During the heyday of the mighty Mali Empire, when its possessions spread to the northern territories, the city of Timbuktu occupied a strategically important position, becoming a key crossroads of trade routes connecting North Africa and the land south of the Sahara. Merchant caravans arriving from Morocco and Egypt brought valuable goods here, such as salt, exquisite fabrics, and rare books. At the same time, traders from the hinterland of Africa offered their riches, gold, slaves, and ivory. However, Timbuktu was not limited to the role of an ordinary market. Thanks to the enlightened patronage of Mansa Musa and his followers, the city transformed into a true center of knowledge and culture. After his famous pilgrimage to Mecca, Mansa Musa, impressed by what he saw in Cairo and Mecca, began to actively attract outstanding scientists, talented architects, and gifted poets to Mali. Many of them found their new home in Timbuktu. Soon, among the sandy streets and mud brick houses, majestic mosques and madrasas, Muslim schools, began to rise, becoming symbols of the city's prosperity and intellectual development. The University of Sankore, one of the oldest educational institutions in the world, gained the most fame. Sankore differed from European universities of that time. There was no strict system of diplomas and official academic degrees. However, a wide variety of disciplines were studied within its walls: theology, law, astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and literature. Books brought by merchants and scholars from distant cities such as Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba, and Constantinople were meticulously copied and carefully stored here, making Timbuktu a true treasure trove of knowledge and wisdom. Timbuktu was a city of amazing combination. The hubbub of market squares was organically intertwined with the quiet rustle of palm leaves, which served as pages for countless texts. In the luxurious houses of wealthy merchants, there were personal collections of hundreds and sometimes thousands of volumes. Many Mansa families revered books as a symbol of prosperity and spiritual wealth, and bibliophiles spared no expense, giving away fortunes for the rarest manuscripts. As evening approached, when the heat of the day subsided and a light breeze swept through the narrow city streets, lively discussions flared up in the courtyards of the madrasas. Young students, settled in the shade, listened to their mentors, delving into the interpretation of Quranic verses, comprehending the foundations of jurisprudence, and trying to unravel the mysteries of celestial bodies. However, it is worth noting that access to knowledge in Timbuktu was not open to everyone. The city was an integral part of an extensive trading system and prospered thanks to gold placers coming from the southern lands, customs duties from caravans, and the generous patronage of the Mansa. Here, education and wealth went hand in hand, and majestic mosques and educational schools rose next to bustling markets where salt, spices, and slaves were actively traded. Timbuktu was a city woven from contradictions. During the day, it was bustling with life, filled with bustle, the shouts of merchants, and the clinking of coins, and at night it plunged into silence, broken only by the rustle of turning pages. Melodious chants sounded in the mosques of Timbuktu, and life flowed at a measured pace. The city aroused admiration among contemporaries, as evidenced by numerous historical chronicles. Leo Africanus, an Andalusian poet and diplomat, recalled many years later that the inhabitants of this amazing place valued books above precious metals. Timbuktu was a fusion of African culture and the traditions of the Islamic East, resulting in something completely unique. It was a center where ordinary merchants held philosophical conversations and learned men could find wealth thanks to their sought-after manuscripts. But nothing lasts forever under the moon. While new libraries and mosques were being built in Timbuktu, European powers in the north were looking for alternative routes to gold and spices, seeking to bypass the vast sands of the Sahara. While the students of the madrasa delved into the study of ancient texts, ships were already anchoring off the coast of West Africa, carrying with them different orders and a new history. But in the 14th century, Timbuktu was at the peak of its power, being a city known in Europe as an earthly paradise, abundant in gold and wisdom, a symbol of African greatness and enlightenment. In the next chapter, the reader will be able to look behind the walls of luxurious palaces and bustling markets to find out what the daily life of ordinary citizens and noble families of the Mali Empire was like. After all, the true strength of any state lies not only in the wealth of the treasury and the number of books, but also in the people, in the interweaving of their destinies, which make up the very fabric of the empire. Chapter 6, Culture and Way of Life in Mali, from the everyday life of ordinary people to the splendor of the elite. During the heyday of its power, the Mali Empire was not only a land abundant in gold and a crossroads of trade routes, but also a habitat for many people. In these lands, stretching among endless savannas, fertile valleys, and noisy cities, life pulsed, filled with work, joys, and concerns. The greatness of the empire was manifested not only in the luxury of palaces and scholarly treatises, but also in the rhythm of life in the fields and markets, in the melodies of songs and traditions, in morning prayers and evening stories around campfires. Malian society was complex and diverse. At the head of the state stood the Mansa, the supreme ruler, personifying power and prosperity. The Mansa was revered as a sacred and inviolable figure, and his countless riches were considered public property. However, the Mansa did not rule alone. Under his leadership was an entire hierarchy of governors, military leaders, and elders who ruled provinces and villages, collected taxes, and ensured the maintenance of order. The elite of the empire, consisting of nobles, civil servants, and merchants, preferred city life. Their dwellings, built of clay and wood, were decorated with exquisite fabrics and carpets brought from distant countries. They adorned themselves in light cotton garments, sometimes embroidered with gold threads, and wore jewelry made of gold and ivory, rings, necklaces, and bracelets. It is important to note that the Malian nobility did not lead a life of idleness. On the contrary, they actively participated in the governance of the state, managed lands, commanded troops, and engaged in trade. Many members of the elite practiced Islam, attended mosques, engaged in charity, funded the construction of schools, and employed scholars. Beyond the city walls, in rural areas and remote corners of the empire, lived the majority of the population. These were farmers, skilled craftsmen, game hunters, fishermen, and nomadic tribes. Their existence was simple, but filled with daily chores and hard work. Farmers cultivated fields, growing millet, sorghum, rice, and various vegetables. Along the riverbanks, they fished, and their herds grazed in the vast pastures. Their dwellings were modest, round huts covered with thatched roofs, with walls made of clay and wood. In such homes lived entire generations of families, fathers and mothers, their offspring, and venerable elders. In the evenings, the household gathered around a blazing hearth. Women prepared food, roasting millet, stewing vegetables, and serving spicy sauces. Men shared stories, and children listened with bated breath to every word. These narratives were passed down from mouth to mouth, from generation to generation, preserving the memory of the people, their fears and dreams, hopes and legends. A special position in society was occupied by the Jeli, storytellers who carefully preserved oral history. The Jeli were knowledgeable in the genealogies of all noble families, remembered the exploits of ancestors, ancient melodies, and wise teachings. They were not just singers, but real archives of the people, living libraries, without whom the Chronicle of Mali could have been lost to oblivion. The Jeli accompanied celebrations and rituals, wedding ceremonies, and funeral processions. They could raise the ruler to heavenly heights, but also remind him of forgotten obligations to his people. In the society of the ancient Malian Empire, women played a multifaceted and significant role. They not only managed the household, raised children, and traded in bustling markets, but also proved themselves as talented craftswomen, creating exquisite jewelry and ceramics. Among them were representatives of noble families who managed vast lands, and wives of ordinary peasants who toiled in the fields under the scorching sun. Family ties in Mali were particularly strong. Marriages were concluded not only by the will of the heart, but also to strengthen ties between influential families and clans. Genealogy was of great importance, and every resident of the empire remembered the names of their ancestors for several generations, honoring the traditions and history of their lineage. However, in the shadow of the grandeur of the Malian Empire, there was also a dark side, slavery, which was widespread and was a generally accepted practice. Slaves were prisoners of war, people who could not pay their debts, or those who were sold into slavery by neighboring tribes. They worked in the fields, in the homes of the nobility, in caravans, and even in the army, performing the hardest and dirtiest work. It is worth noting that the position of a slave in Mali differed somewhat from the classical understanding of slavery. Slaves had the right to start families, own property, and even eventually buy their freedom. Some of them achieved a high position in society, becoming respected people. Thus, slavery in Mali was not so much a lifelong stigma as a social step that could be overcome with desire and perseverance. In the life of the empire, religion occupied a central place, exerting a profound influence on all aspects of society. Islam, like an invisible river, penetrated deep into the country, along with trade caravans and streams of pilgrims, steadily spreading its dogmas and traditions. Pious Muslims turned to Allah in prayer 5 times a day, strictly observed the prescribed fast during the holy month of Ramadan, and gathered in mosques to praise the Almighty. However, despite the spread of Islam, ancient beliefs dating back centuries were still preserved in remote villages. Locals continued to worship the spirits of ancestors, perform rituals, and offer sacrifices, seeking to appease the gods and ensure the well-being of their families. Islam and local customs were intricately intertwined, creating a unique African culture in which religious rites harmoniously combined with traditional beliefs. Holidays and rituals were celebrated with particular generosity and splendor. Residents of the empire held lavish celebrations in honor of the harvest, celebrated important religious dates, sang and danced to the sound of drums, competed in wrestling, held lavish feasts, and offered sacrificial food to the spirits of ancestors, believing in their patronage and protection. Such was life in the empire, multifaceted, bustling, and full of vitality. Here, amidst humble huts and majestic palaces, between bustling markets and serene mosques, in the dust of roads and the rustle of palm leaves, lived people who, through their labor and talent, built one of the greatest states of their time. They lived, loved, suffered, dreamed, and tirelessly wove the fabric of history that has reached us through the ages as whispers of sands and echoes of forgotten songs. But nothing in this world is eternal, and ominous clouds were already gathering on the horizon above the land of Mali, foreshadowing impending changes. In the next chapter, the reader will learn how and why this great empire fell under the blows of fate, leaving behind only ruins and legends. Chapter 7 is dedicated to the tragic loss of the former greatness of the African continent, where flourishing gives way to decline, and even the most powerful empires, seemingly unshakable in their wealth, eventually fall into decay. The history of Mali serves as a striking example of this. Once brilliant, like gold in the rays of the sun, the empire disappeared from the political map of the world, leaving behind only echoes of legends. But what factors led to such a sad outcome? How did a land capable of feeding millions lose its power? Why was an empire whose rulers once inspired awe throughout the world consigned to oblivion? The search for answers to these questions is like reading mysterious signs inscribed by the wind on the sands of time. The first harbingers of decline appeared shortly after the death of Mansa Musa. His successors, lacking the charisma and foresight of their predecessor, could not keep the empire at its former height. Despite the continued wealth of Mali, ominous cracks began to appear in its foundation. One of the key reasons for the weakening of the state was a law inherent to all great empires. The larger the territory, the more difficult it is to govern. The vast expanses of Mali stretched for thousands of kilometers, from the Atlantic coast to the arid outskirts of the Sahara. Effective management of such a vast space was a daunting task even in the most favorable times. After Musa's death, the internal management system began to fail. Provinces increasingly showed a desire for independence, and governors ignored the instructions of the center, pursuing their own interests. The strengthening of regional leaders steadily undermined the unity of the state, bringing its inevitable collapse closer. Internal strife became another misfortune that befell the state. Fierce struggles for supreme power, behind-the-scenes intrigues, and bloody wars between numerous contenders for the throne relentlessly depleted the country's already meager resources and destabilized the situation. Trade volumes steadily declined, and roads, once bustling, turned into dangerous routes, posing threats to travelers and merchants. However, the The decline was not only caused by internal troubles, external factors also made their tragic contribution to the fate of the state. In the north, the influence of the neighboring Songhai state increased. Initially, one of the provinces of Mali, Songhai gradually grew stronger and gained long-awaited independence. In the 15th century, Songhai began active expansion, seizing territories previously belonging to Mali. By the end of the century, Songhai had become the new dominant force in the region, eclipsing the former hegemon. In addition, the caravan trade, which for centuries had been a source of prosperity and well-being for Mali, gradually began to fade. This was due to changes in traditional trade routes, as well as the growing influence of European powers on the African coast. In the 15th century, enterprising Portuguese began actively laying sea routes along the western coast of the continent, seeking to establish direct access to valuable resources. They sought gold, exotic spices, and slaves, and found them, but no longer through grueling Saharan crossings, but directly through the vast ocean. The old caravan system began to rapidly lose its former significance. Financial flows, valuable goods, and political influence flowed into other hands, leaving the once prosperous lands in poverty and oblivion. Environmental challenges and population growth became an additional burden for the Mali Empire. The growing population put pressure on land resources, leading to soil depletion, crop failures, droughts, and mass livestock deaths. These factors, like relentless waves, gradually destroyed the foundation of the empire. External powers began to change their attitude towards Africa, which also played a significant role in the decline of Mali. If previously Arab chroniclers and travelers spoke enthusiastically about Mali, then with the strengthening of European empires, the perception of the continent underwent a radical change. In the 15th to 16th centuries, Europeans ceased to see Africa as an equal partner. Instead, they began to view it as a source of valuable resources, a territory for colonization, and a profitable market for the slave trade. Within this new narrative, there was no place for tales of great empires, the famed libraries of Timbuktu, and the opulent golden palaces of Niani. The image of Africa was deliberately simplified and reduced to the concept of a dark continent populated by savage tribes in need of civilization and subjugation. The existence of the prosperous Malian Empire contradicted the colonial ambitions of European powers. It was far more convenient to portray Africa as a wild and undeveloped territory in need of exploration than to acknowledge that long before the arrival of Europeans, there already existed developed cities, universities, roads, and rich libraries. Historical chronicles containing mentions of Africa and its states were deliberately forgotten and relegated to archives. Maps that once featured the names of Mali and Timbuktu became dusty artifacts. In their place came new geographical maps depicting Africa as a blank slate, a terra incognita, a place where, according to Europeans, there was no history or culture. For generations, Europeans were raised with the notion that beyond the Mediterranean lay only lands inhabited by wild and barbaric tribes. The majestic Malian Empire and its outstanding rulers were gradually erased from collective memory. This process of oblivion did not happen instantly, but rather resembled the slow disappearance of grains of sand carried by the wind from dunes over centuries. Gradually, step by step, the former greatness of Mali ceased to exist in the minds of Europeans. Paradoxically, it was Arab travelers and scholars who first left written accounts of the existence of Mali and then consigned them to oblivion. Their descendants, venturing into Africa in search of slaves and gold, no longer had any idea of Mansa Musa, a ruler whose wealth astounded the imagination, or of the famous Sankore Library, a center of knowledge and culture. However, not only the history of Mali was forgotten, but also the very idea that Africa could be more than just an object of conquest and exploitation, but an independent subject of history, a continent where empires flourished, cities were built, and cultures developed that were no less complex than European or Asian civilizations. The memory of this greatness vanished, and with it went the sense of equality between continents. The next part of this work will examine how the erasure of Mali's history from memory influenced the further perception of Africa, and why this important chapter of history still remains little known to the general public. At the moment when European powers firmly established themselves on the African continent in the 15th and 16th centuries, the glorious past of the Malian Empire was consigned to oblivion. For new generations of European traders and colonizers, Africa became a territory suitable only for exploitation, seizure, and sale. In their narratives, there was no room for magnificent palaces or the sages of Timbuktu. It was far more advantageous for them to portray Africa as a silent target, devoid of history and destined to satisfy their own selfish goals. This deliberate forgetfulness was not accidental. Eradicating the memory of great African empires became an integral part of colonial ideology. Legends of Mansa Musa ceased to be passed down orally, and the name Mali disappeared from the pages of European books and geographical maps. History was rewritten to justify the dominance of one continent over another, creating an illusion of superiority and the legitimacy of colonial rule. Even centuries later, when the era of colonialism came to an end, echoes of this oblivion continued to resonate in school textbooks in Europe and America. The history of Africa was either completely absent or reduced to stories of European conquests, the slave trade, and the so-called civilizing mission. The memory of Mali became a barely audible whisper of forgotten pages, rare mentions in Arab chronicles, and ancient maps covered with dust in archives. Only a few scholars and historians, driven by a thirst for truth, tried to reconstruct the picture of past greatness, gathering the fragments of a lost past. But, like any forgotten memory, the history of Mali continued to live in the oral traditions of the peoples of West Africa, passed down from generation to generation, preserving the hope for a revival of the memory of the great empire. In the tales of the griots, like an echo of a long-gone era, and in the yellowed manuscripts carefully preserved in the families of scholars in Timbuktu, the memory of past greatness flickers. In a turbulent age, when African peoples threw off the shackles of colonialism and strove for freedom, memories of the brilliant Malian Empire began a triumphant return. In them, the people saw visible confirmation that Africa is not just a continent mired in poverty and ignorance, but a land with a rich history and a unique culture, independent of European influence. However, by that time, the material evidence of past glory had practically vanished, buried beneath the layers of centuries and the shifting sands of time. Cities that once gleamed with splendor lay in ruins or were consigned to oblivion. The ancient manuscripts of Timbuktu, priceless treasures of knowledge, gathered dust in private collections and were sometimes mercilessly destroyed. The most terrible loss was not gold or ruined cities, but the deliberate erasure from human memory of the very fact that Africa had once been powerful and enlightened. The eradication of historical memory of Mali became an integral part of the grand narrative that had been imposed on the world for centuries, presenting Africa only as a continent where poverty, savagery, and endless suffering reigned. And to this day, despite dozens of painstaking studies, inspiring books, and documentaries, the memory of Mali remains only a pale shadow of its former greatness. Few know that in those dark ages, when Europe was engulfed in the flames of war and devastated by plague, in the heart of Africa there was a thriving state where lively trade in gold was conducted, where libraries held hundreds of thousands of priceless books, where majestic cities and temples were erected. The memory of Mali is a stark reminder of how easily history can be forgotten or deliberately distorted. how humanity tends to remember only what fits into a convenient narrative, casting inconvenient facts and evidence into the shadows. If you listen to the silence, you can catch echoes of a bygone era in songs, the chronicles of Ibn Battuta, and old maps where an inscription about the reign of a king whose wealth was unparalleled adorns West Africa. This story will serve as a starting point for discussing the myths and facts surrounding the figure of Mansa Musa, whose name has become a legend in which truth is intertwined with fiction, leaving behind a mystery that stirs minds even today. In history, there are rarely figures shrouded in such a bright and almost mythical aura as Mansa Musa. He is called the richest man of all time. His pilgrimage to Mecca is compared to the movement of a golden comet, and on maps, he is depicted surrounded by a scepter of pure gold and endowed with the gaze of a ruler whose power extends from the ocean to the sands of the Sahara. But where does reality end and legend begin? Let's try to carefully walk along this edge. Most modern sources, including economists and historians, agree that Mansa Musa was the richest man in history. Even by the most modest estimates, his fortune exceeded tens of billions of dollars in modern terms. However, these figures are conditional. Musa had no bank accounts, stocks, or factories. His wealth was measured not in numbers, but in the scale of his influence. He controlled the world's largest gold deposits, a resource that in the Middle Ages had enormous value and defined the economy of entire continents. At that time, Mali produced approximately half of the world's gold. This gold did not just lie in the ground, it flowed along caravan routes, passed from hand to hand of merchants, turned into coins in Egypt, jewelry in Morocco, and ransom in India. Mansa Musa had access to all these flows. He not only collected taxes on mining and trade, but also managed gold as a symbol of power. His famous generosity in Cairo, when he distributed gold to the poor, merchants, imams, and the Sultan, was recorded in chronicles not because it was unusual, but because it was overwhelming. His gifts were so generous that they caused inflation and an economic crisis. Gold prices in the region fell for decades. It was this generosity that became the breeding ground for legends. Chroniclers of the East, such as Ibn Khaldun and Ibn Battuta, described him not just as a rich man, but as the embodiment of royal splendor. According to their stories, Musa's caravans stretched for kilometers. His servants were dressed in silk and gold, and his tents were decorated with precious fabrics. These descriptions gave rise to an image that has inspired the imagination for centuries, an image of a king whose every step leaves behind brilliance and fragrance. From the European side, the legend acquired new details. Maps of the 15th century depict Musa as a black king in a crown with a giant golden ball in his hands. He became a symbol of exotic wealth that was both admired and feared. Incredible stories about halls paved with gold, about caravans 3 days' journey long, about the fact that gold in Mali was so common that even animals were decorated with it, added fog around Musa's figure. But behind all this mythology remains something real and much more significant. Mansa Musa was not just a rich man, he was a ruler who understood the power of gesture. His generosity was not an impulse, but a strategy. He knew that human memory feeds on images, and he created these images himself. His gold was not only a treasure, but also an instrument of influence. His pilgrimage was a political statement, a diplomatic mission, an act of faith, and a cultural exchange. He demonstrated to the world that there was a power south of the Sahara no less mighty than the caliphates of the East and the kingdoms of Europe, and that was his true strength. Musa's wealth was not only in bullion, but in the people he inspired, the cities he built, the mosques and libraries that remained after him. He turned gold into culture, and while much of his physical legacy has disappeared, the symbol remains. Today, the name of Mansa Musa is returning to the modern consciousness. Films are being made about him, his image appears in games and books, and his name is increasingly mentioned in the context of the global history of wealth and power. But behind all this, it is important not to forget that he was more than just a king with treasures, a voice that did not remain silent but spoke confidently and brightly. It was simply no longer listened to. In the next chapter, we will try to trace how the legacy of the Mali Empire is reflected in modern Africa, what has survived, what has disappeared, and what seeds of the past are still sprouting in the present. The once mighty Mali Empire, having left behind splendor and power, now exists only in the annals of history. Majestic palaces have turned into ruins, priceless libraries have fallen victim to oblivion, and noisy markets have fallen silent, giving way to silence. However, like a skilled craftsman, history does not disappear without a trace, leaving indelible imprints on the fabric of culture, in the ringing rhythms of language, in the melodic chants of songs, and in the collective memory of generations. These traces, sometimes barely perceptible, like shadows on wet sand, require close attention and painstaking search. The modern state of Mali, which arose on the territory of the once great empire, presents a picture of contrasts. It is one of the poorest countries in the world, bearing the burden of a colonial past, devastating conflicts, and economic turmoil. But beneath the veil of everyday life, as if through a thin fabric, the echoes of past eras appear. First of all, they are felt in the language and culture of the Mandinka people, the direct descendants of those who built the Mali Empire. They carefully preserve their language, passing on songs and legends from mouth to mouth, like precious relics. In family circles, among wise elders, and at village gatherings, stories are still told about legendary rulers such as Sundiata Keita and Mansa Musa, about the glorious times when their land was the heart of the world. The jealous, the keepers of oral history, like living chroniclers, tell legends and sing songs, accompanying themselves on the kora, a traditional West African instrument whose sound transports listeners to the distant past. Architectural monuments, like ghosts of bygone eras, preserve echoes of the former greatness of the Mali Empire. In the heart of the city of Djenné rises the majestic Great Mosque, a grandiose mud brick structure bearing witness to the skill of ancient builders. The mosque, built during the heyday of Mali and having undergone many reconstructions, is still a symbol of the rich culture that flourished in these lands. In the dusty archives of Timbuktu, like in labyrinths of memory, a vibrant intellectual life once thrived. Today, scholars, like archaeologists of the spirit, painstakingly collect ancient texts, restore them, and translate them, striving to restore lost knowledge that was almost lost in oblivion. However, the legacy of Mali is not limited to architectural masterpieces and ancient manuscripts. It lives in the way of thinking, in the respect for history. For the people of West Africa, the memory of Mali is not just a memory of the past, it is an awareness that their ancestors were not only slaves and victims of the colonial era, but also creators of great cities, wise rulers, and keepers of priceless culture. This knowledge acquired particular significance in the 20th century when African countries embarked on the path of struggle for independence. The history of Mali became convincing evidence that Africa has a glorious past, and colonialism was only a tragic episode in the rich and complex history of the continent. Many African leaders and intellectuals turned to the image of Mansa Musa as a symbol of dignity and strength. His name has become an integral part of national identity, a symbol of the struggle for the right to write one's own history. However, as often happens, memories of bygone days carry not only a sense of pride, but also echoes of bitterness. The comparison of past prosperity and current hardships sometimes becomes a painful prick of lost hopes, a testament to how inexorably the passage of time can distort the course of history. Today, Mali and the states adjacent to it are engulfed in the flames of war. Their populations are suffering from hunger, poverty, and incessant conflicts. At first glance, it seems that there is no trace left of those glorious times, only endless sands and silent ruins. But this statement is not entirely true. The memory of past greatness continues to live in the hearts of people, passed down from generation to generation through language, folk songs, and legends. The history of Mali vividly demonstrates that the African continent was not always the dark spot on the world map, as it was once portrayed by European powers. In the distant past, it served as a source of light and knowledge for entire civilizations, a center of prosperity and wisdom. Today, as the world community once again turns its gaze to Africa, viewing it as a promising market and arena for geopolitical maneuvering, it is especially important to remember the rich historical heritage of this continent. We must realize that here, among the vast savannas and scorching deserts, once rang the voices of enlightened sages. Life was bustling in noisy markets, and the pages of ancient manuscripts rustled. Memories of Mali are not just a plunge into the past, they are a kind of mirror in which not only Africa, but the whole world can see its reflection. It is a reminder of how easily one can consign to oblivion all the diversity and richness of human history. In the final chapter, we will turn our gaze to the Mali Empire through the prism of bygone years to assess its legacy and draw lessons for the present. Chapter 11 will be dedicated to everyday life in Mali. Historical chronicles often focus on large-scale battles and lavish rulers, but the true reflection of any state lies in its people, those who lived not in royal chambers, but in simple dwellings, who began their day with the sunrise and ended it with the onset of darkness. In the Mali Empire, there were millions of such people. What was their way of life like? Dawn in a Malian village arrived with the first rays of the sun. As soon as the dawn painted the horizon, the courtyards were filled with the cries of roosters, children's laughter, and the sound of brooms sweeping the ground. Women began to light fires and prepare simple but nutritious food: millet porridge, stewed vegetables, and, if they were lucky, game hunted the day before. Men headed to the fields. The lands adjacent to the Niger River were fertile, and the inhabitants cultivated rice, millet, and sorghum. Herds of cows, goats, and sheep grazed in the pastures. Livestock served not only as a source of food, but also as a symbol of wealth. Peasant labor, full of hardships, was cemented by a spirit of community. Families provided each other with all possible support, and older generations passed on their experience and knowledge to the young. Village settlements existed as a single, close-knit family. After sunset, when the day's worries were left behind, people gathered around a blazing fire. In this circle, soulful melodies were heard, and fascinating stories were told. It was here that the Jeli, the keepers of oral folklore, conveyed to listeners ancient legends about the exploits of past eras. In urban centers such as Timbuktu and Djenné, a different life pulsed. The cities were filled with sounds and movement during the day and plunged into silence at night. At dawn, the market squares opened, where merchants put up for sale a variety of goods: exquisite fabrics, fragrant spices, skillfully made ceramics, precious jewelry, and mysterious amulets. Servants carried full baskets of provisions, and young boys scurried between the rows, begging for small coins from passers-by. On the streets, one could meet representatives of the most diverse peoples and cultures: enterprising merchants from Morocco and Egypt, freedom-loving Tuaregs from the vast desert, hard-working Mandinka from remote villages, as well as those who were deprived of freedom. The Mali Empire was striking in its diversity, like its noisy and colorful markets. Women played an important role in the economic and social life of society, engaging in trade, crafts, and housekeeping. They skillfully wove fabrics, created pottery, and grew fresh vegetables in carefully cultivated gardens. Men built sturdy dwellings, worked in forges, making necessary tools, and accompanied trade caravans, ensuring their safety. Children in Mali entered adulthood early, helping their parents from a young age. Many boys attended madrasas at mosques, where they studied the Holy Quran and mastered the basics of arithmetic. Girls were taught crafts necessary for housekeeping, as well as traditional songs passed down from generation to generation. Celebrations and rituals occupied a special place in the way of life. Weddings, the completion of the harvest, the birth of offspring, holy days, all these events were celebrated with the sounds of music, the rhythm of dances, and an abundance of food. People dressed in their best clothes. Women sparkled with gold and copper bracelets, and men's hairstyles were striking in the complexity of weaving patterns. In every family home, there was an inextricable link between generations. Veneration of ancestors was not just a tribute to tradition, but a cornerstone of existence. Wise elders shared with the younger generations the legends of those who had passed into the afterlife, instructing them in accordance with the laws, customs, and prayers. However, everyday reality consisted not only of holidays. It encompassed worries, back-breaking labor, and illnesses. People lived in close harmony with the earth and the heavens, accepting all joys and hardships as an integral part of their life's journey. The Mali Empire was renowned not only for its majestic palaces and bustling marketplaces. Its true greatness lay in the everyday lives of millions who built homes, loved, celebrated life, and cherished hopes, unaware that their destinies would become part of a grand historical chronicle. The following chapter will delve into the structure of the legislative system and the armed forces of this mighty empire, the mechanisms that ensured stability and order in this vast and diverse world. Chapter 12, Armed Forces, Legal Norms, and the Administration of Justice in the Malian Empire. The greatness of any empire rests not only on economic factors such as trade and gold mining. Of far greater importance are the unwavering rules recognized by all citizens and the presence of a powerful force capable of upholding these rules. The Malian Empire, stretching across a vast territory from the Atlantic coast to the edges of the Sahara, from the fertile lands of the Niger River to the southern forests, needed not only gold, but also a clear system of governance. And such a system was created. The foundation of the empire was the legal norms, which did not exist in the form of written documents as in European or Eastern states. These laws, known by heart and learned from childhood, were passed down from generation to generation like songs and legends. This is the Kurukan Fuga, a code of rules adopted according to tradition after the triumphant victory of Sundiata Keita at the Battle of Kirina. The Kurukan Fuga was not merely a list of punishments, but a comprehensive code defining the principles of peaceful coexistence and harmony. It regulated the rights and responsibilities of citizens, the fair distribution of land resources, the protection of vulnerable populations, and the veneration of the older generation. The laws prescribed respect for women, prohibited starving the needy if a neighbor had food supplies, and called for the peaceful resolution of conflicts. There were strict rules governing trade, agriculture, marital relations, and inheritance procedures. Despite the Mansa's unlimited power, his actions were strictly regulated by law, which required the ruler to be just and care for the welfare of the people. The law, like an impregnable fortress wall, needs reliable protection, and in the Mali Empire, this role was fulfilled by its valiant army. The state's armed forces were not merely a defensive line against external threats, but also a powerful tool for maintaining internal order, a bastion of security for trade caravans and prosperous cities, and a reliable shield protecting vital trade arteries. In its ranks, foot soldiers and brave horsemen fought shoulder to shoulder, armed with sharp spears, deadly bows, and sturdy shields, ready to meet any challenge. The military organization of Mali was based on several fundamental principles. In peacetime, the majority of the population was engaged in cultivating the land and developing crafts, ensuring the country's economic prosperity. However, when a threat loomed over the empire, men, driven by a sense of duty and patriotism, gathered under the banners of their clans and came to the defense of their homeland. Alongside the militia, there were also professional warriors who had undergone rigorous training and were equipped with everything necessary for combat. At the head of this formidable army were experienced commanders appointed directly by the Mansa, the supreme ruler of the empire. Their duties included not only monitoring the combat training of soldiers, but also maintaining strict discipline in the ranks of the army. Any violation of orders, display of cowardice on the battlefield, or mistreatment of civilians resulted in severe punishment, which helped maintain high morale and professionalism in the army. Along the borders of the empire were border garrisons and watchtowers, constantly monitoring the safety of caravan routes, ensuring uninterrupted trade and economic stability. Each major city had military garrisons ready at any moment to suppress possible uprisings or repel sudden enemy raids. The soldiers of Mali were renowned for their unwavering steadfastness and iron discipline, which made them a formidable force on the battlefield. They wore light but reliable leather armor, sometimes reinforced with metal plates, providing additional protection. Their weapons were simple but effective: spears for close combat, swords for swift attacks, and bows for striking the enemy from a distance. However, the main weapon of the Mali army was its unbreakable unity, which allowed warriors to overcome any difficulties and achieve victories even over superior enemy forces. However, the power of the Mali Empire rested not solely on military strength, but also on a well-developed justice system, which served as a cornerstone of its stability. The judicial system in Mali was based on a combination of local customs and principles of Muslim law, which ensured fairness and order in society. In every settlement, whether it was a large city or a small village, councils of elders and wise advisors operated, resolving conflicts, making decisions, and ensuring compliance with laws. For resolving cases involving the interests of noble persons, there was a palace court headed by the Mansa himself. Punishments for crimes varied depending on their severity. Minor offenses were subject to fines or community service, while serious crimes could result in exile, confiscation of property, or even the death penalty. It is important to note that the purpose of justice was not only deterrence, but also the restoration of harmony and fairness in society. Even the most complex disputes were resolved in such a way as to maintain peace and prevent further conflicts. In Mali, maintaining peace was considered a common task in which not only the Mansa and his army participated, but all residents of the empire. Everyone understood that order is a prerequisite for prosperity and well-being. The following section will detail how the Mali Empire ensured justice across its vast territory, how wars were waged, and what it meant to be a Malian warrior. The uniqueness of Mali lay in its ability to maintain order across vast expanses where roads disappeared beyond the horizon and traveling between cities could take weeks. The secret lay in a multi-level and flexible system of governance and justice, which made it possible to effectively solve problems and maintain stability in the empire. The state was skillfully divided into provinces and districts where power was exercised by a governor appointed from the center, and a local chief whose duty was to collect taxes and organize the protection of the territory from external threats. In each province, there was a council of elders, a respected body that dealt with resolving pressing issues of local importance. Their competence included settling disputes between residents, formalizing marriage agreements, resolving land disputes, and controlling trade operations. The decisions of the wise elders were based on centuries-old traditions and norms of Muslim law, the influence of which steadily grew over time. In cases where reaching a compromise at the local level proved impossible, the case was referred to the capital for consideration. There, at the court of the Mansa, a supreme council functioned, consisting of judges and advisors with deep knowledge and experience. Particularly important cases involving the interests of the nobility, trade issues, or conflicts between provinces were considered in the presence of the ruler himself, which emphasized his role as the supreme arbiter. In the Malian justice system, priority was given to reconciling the parties and restoring harmony in society. In the event of a crime, the goal was not so much to punish the perpetrator as to restore peace and justice. Penalties were usually directed to helping the victim, and the offender had to make a public apology and make commitments demonstrating their remorse. This approach helped maintain social cohesion and prevent hostility. However, there were moments in history when ordinary legal mechanisms proved powerless in the face of impending danger. In such critical moments, the army stood up to defend the state. Throughout its existence, the Mali Empire faced various threats, from revolts of willful governors and sudden raids by nomadic tribes to aggressive attempts by neighboring powers to expand their possessions at the expense of its territories. War was certainly a burden, but also a harsh necessity. When a military campaign was brewing, the Mansa declared a general mobilization throughout the empire. Swift messengers carried the ruler's decrees, warriors rushed to arms, and blacksmiths tirelessly forged swords and sharpened spearheads. The armed forces of Mali could reach impressive numbers, numbering tens of thousands of warriors ready to stand under the banners of their clans at the call and go to defend their native empire. The military strategy of Mali was distinguished by its adaptability and ability to adapt to circumstances. The warriors knew the area perfectly, skillfully used its features for rapid movement and covert maneuvers. Horse archers, like a whirlwind, fell upon the enemy, inflicted swift blows, and retreated, not allowing the enemy to regroup and fight back. But the most formidable weapon of the Malian army was not only the strength of steel, but also their unwavering cohesion. The warriors clearly understood what they were fighting for. The well-being of their families, the inviolability of their native lands, and the observance of just laws were more precious to them than any gold. They were convinced of the righteousness of their cause and the indomitable power of their people. After a victory, the Mali Empire did not seek the total annihilation of the defeated enemy. Captives were often given the chance to become part of Malian society, occupying various social niches, from slaves and warriors to peasants. The lands of the vanquished were often integrated into Mali, their inhabitants adopting new laws while preserving their cultural traditions and customs. In the state of Mali, justice and military might were two sides of the same coin. It was impossible to imagine law without the power to defend it, just as it was impossible to imagine an army not bound by moral principles. It was in this harmonious combination that the indomitable power of the state lay. Thanks to this strength, trade caravans could freely cross the vast deserts, farmers could peacefully engage in their labor, and cities grew and prospered. But history teaches us that nothing lasts forever. When the law lost its force, when the army weakened, when internal strife and external enemies began to tear the empire apart, its inevitable decline followed. In the next chapter, we will delve into the world of myths and legends left behind by the Mali Empire, those tales that have stood the test of time, reminding us of a period when one of the world's greatest empires flourished in the heart of Africa. Chapter 13 will be devoted to the secrets and legends of the Mali Empire. When a mighty empire passes into history, not only magnificent cities and palaces disappear with it, but also the established order. Names are forgotten and dates are erased. However, stories and legends remain, like the last sparks of a dying fire, which the wind carries throughout the world. The Mali Empire left behind many such sparks. And although official historical records remain silent, in songs, traditions, and oral tales, its image continues to live on for many centuries. Ancient legends preserve the amazing story of Abu Bakr II, brother of the legendary Mansa Musa, who, heeding the call of the unknown, left the throne for a daring dream to cross the vast Atlantic and find lands hidden beyond the horizon. Legend has it that he equipped an impressive armada of 200 ships and set sail to meet his destiny. However, none of these ships returned. There is a belief that Abu Bakr either met his end in the depths of the ocean or discovered new lands beyond the seas. This exciting story still stirs the minds. Some modern researchers hypothesize that Abu Bakr's ships may have reached the shores of South America long before Christopher Columbus. Despite the lack of irrefutable evidence, this legend continues to inspire and reminds us that the Mali Empire extended its gaze far beyond what was visible. Among the Mandinka people, there are also stories of Mansa Musa's countless treasures, secretly buried in the sands of the desert to protect them from enemy encroachment. Elderly storytellers used to say that on certain nights, when the wind raises sandstorms, one can discern the golden domes of a palace in the distance among the dunes, which disappear with the first rays of the rising sun. In Timbuktu, there were rumors that someday a manuscript would be discovered within the walls of the ancient libraries, capable of revealing the secrets of bygone eras, a book containing the names of forgotten rulers and a map leading to the lost cities of the great empire. Entire myths full of miracles and incredible deeds were composed around the rulers. Tales were told of Mansa Musa as if he possessed the alchemical secret of turning ordinary iron into precious gold. Gold, according to legends, followed him everywhere, like a faithful dog. It was said that one word from him was enough to stop bloody wars and heal the most terrible diseases. Popular rumor whispered about the empire's mysterious guardians, the spirits of the desert, an invisible wall protecting trade caravans from bandit raids. It is still said that the shadows of Mali's old warriors roam the vast expanses, vigilantly watching over travelers. These legends, like precious stones, have survived the ages, and in their depths lies something more than just children's tales. In them, one can hear the longing for lost greatness, for the times when Africa basked in luxury and power, when knowledge, trade, and culture flourished on this fertile land. And in each of these stories lives an undying hope that these glorious times will return, that trade caravans will once again travel along the ancient roads, libraries will open their doors to those eager for knowledge, and the gold of Mali will once again shine under the African stars. Legends are living memory, impervious to the destructive influence of time. As long as the memory of the great Mali Empire lives, so does the hope for its revival. As we reverently open the forgotten pages of African history, we are like prospectors, unearthing sparks of past grandeur that seemed forever lost in the sands of time. For history is not merely dry facts and dates, but vibrant sagas, the mysterious whispers of ancestors, the spectral shadows of the past that invisibly accompany us in the present. The Empire of Mali vanished long ago from the face of the earth, yet its legends continue to live in the hearts of people. Perhaps it is these legends that remind us that no civilization disappears without a trace as long as the memory of it lives on. Epilogue of a lost empire, how the great empire of Mali was consigned to oblivion. The history of the Malian Empire is a narrative that could easily have been consigned to oblivion, buried beneath layers of time, synopsis, and deliberate disregard. It is a history that has been preferentially erased from textbooks and geographical maps to make room for chronicles of conquest, slavery, and colonialism. Yet, despite the lack of prominent mention, it has not disappeared. It continues to live in silence, in the rustling of ancient manuscripts, in the tales of elders, and in the outlines of maps where once the inscription proudly proclaimed, "Here reigns the wealthiest ruler in the world." Like a comet, the Empire of Mali dazzled the world with its splendor, then vanished, leaving behind only a misty trail. But upon closer inspection, this trail is still discernible. For centuries, a state existed in West Africa that managed to unite diverse peoples, create a prosperous economy, and erect cities that became centers of knowledge and culture. While Europe was engulfed in wars and epidemics, Mali thrived in trade and education. Prayers and songs were sung, manuscripts were collected, and roads were built along which caravans moved. The name Mansa Musa is forever linked to the greatness of the Malian Empire. His immense wealth and legendary generosity left an indelible mark on history, but his main achievement was transforming the state into a thriving center of culture and spirituality. The famous pilgrimage to Mecca is not just a tale of dispensing gold, but a vivid testimony to how African civilization announced itself loudly on the world stage. However, like all empires, Mali could not escape the relentless influence of time. Internal conflicts, the onslaught of external enemies, changing trade routes, and, ultimately, consignment to oblivion by European powers led to its decline. It gradually faded away, like an evening star disappearing in the rays of the setting sun. Nevertheless, through the thick layers of centuries, through the veil of dust and silence, one can discern that the legacy of Mali has not disappeared without a trace. The memory of it is carefully preserved in the hearts of people, in the language, in the rich culture. It lives on in ancient manuscripts that are now painstakingly deciphered by scholars. It continues to live in cities where the majestic walls of mosques are still illuminated by the rays of the rising sun. It resonates in the songs of the jellies, in magical tales and myths. This story is not just a narrative of bygone days. It is a warning about how easily the past can be distorted, how easily great civilizations can be consigned to oblivion if their achievements do not conform to someone's preconceived notions. It is a reminder that human power is fragile, but the memory of a people is stubborn and possesses remarkable resilience. In an era when the eyes of the world are once again turned to the African continent and interest in its rich culture, centuries-old history, and natural resources is steadily growing, it is especially important not to forget that behind this visible splendor lies a complex and multifaceted historical canvas that has been undeservedly obscured for too long. The Empire of Mali serves as a vivid reminder that greatness can blossom where it is least expected to be seen. Power lies not only in military might, but also in the ability to create, develop trade relations, accumulate knowledge, and pass it on to future generations. Gold is not just a precious metal. It is a symbol of wisdom, cultural heritage, and spiritual values. Perhaps the day will come when, sitting under the vast starry sky of Africa, someone will once again tell the mesmerizing story of Mali, of a time when a great empire, unparalleled, shone in the heart of the continent. In this story, like an echo resounding through the ages, the tale of people who lived, loved, built cities, and dreamed of the future just as we do today will be heard. And in this narrative, something truly important will inevitably be found. A reminder that history is always much deeper and broader than the dry facts etched on the pages of books. History is the quiet whisper of ancestors, which can be heard only by those who are willing to listen and reflect attentively.